welcome to today's deep dive. I am so glad you are here joining us today. We have just a massive, dense stack of material to unpack for you.
We really do. It's quite a lot.
Yeah. But before we jump into the thick of it, just a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the show. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep explorations.
Absolutely.
And I will tell you right off the bat, if the topics we are unpacking today hook you, you are definitely going to want to head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books.
Right, to buy the ebook for yourself so you can actually read the source material firsthand.
Exactly. You should also make a point to follow the author at Conrad Riker over on Substack to keep up with his latest writings and research.
Highly recommend that if this topic is in your wheelhouse.
So our mission today is to dive headfirst into a newly released, highly provocative ebook. It's titled Empires Don't Build Themselves: The Rational Case for Masculine Governance, and it's by Conrad Riker.
Okay, before we even look at a single page of this text, we really need to set a very clear, neutral framework for you.
Yeah, that is crucial.
Because the source material we are analyzing today is deeply and intentionally politically charged.
Very much so.
It is explicitly written to appeal to what is often categorized as a red-pilled audience, the broader manosphere, and men's rights activists. The author's stated goal is to examine the history of our institutions before, and this is his exact phrasing, before they were captured by feminists and Marxists.
Right.
So we need to make it absolutely unequivocally clear to you listening right now. We are not taking sides.
No, we are not endorsing Conrad Riker's worldview.
Exactly. Nor are we validating the ideologies or the political stances presented in this book.
Our goal for this deep dive is strictly objective. We are here to impartially report, analyze, and synthesize the author's arguments.
We're looking at what he says about history, human biology, and what he terms institutional capture.
We just want to give you a clear, unfiltered window into the contents of the book exactly as they are written. We are simply your neutral guides through a very fiery text.
You're just breaking down the arguments currently circulating in this specific cultural discourse.
Right, so to start, the core premise that Riker builds his entire thesis around is that historical empires, whether you are looking at the legions of Rome, the administrators of the British Mandate, or even the builders of the pyramids, he says they were fundamentally built on unyielding biological masculine traits.
And his argument is that modern society is currently crumbling specifically because our institutions have replaced that hard-nosed masculine governance with consensus building.
Consensus building, sensitivity training, progressive ideologies, yeah.
It's a sweeping, all-encompassing thesis. The book essentially argues that the blueprint for civilization itself is entirely reliant on male endocrinology and psychology.
And that by systematically suppressing that blueprint, the West is engineering its own collapse.
Yeah, he doesn't view this as a cultural shift. He views it as a literal biological mutiny.
A biological mutiny, and that biological angle is precisely where he grounds his entire argument. So the first major section of his book is dedicated to what he calls the biological blueprint of power.
He kicks things off with his endocrine argument.
Right. He makes this overarching claim that modern men are experiencing a 20% annual drop in testosterone.
Which is a huge number.
It is. And because of this, he literally refers to modern office workers as silverbacks in swivel chairs.
The imagery is incredibly stark. He uses this alleged drop in testosterone to contrast the modern male experience with historical eras of conquest.
He paints this picture of a society where the raw materials of ambition are literally depleting from the human bloodstream.
Right. And to anchor this claim in science, he leans heavily on a 2016 study from the Journal of Endocrinology. He specifically focuses on the cortisol to testosterone ratio in men versus women.
Yeah, this ratio is the absolute bedrock of his initial premise. Riker breaks down the data to argue that under extreme stress, male biology is uniquely optimized for split-second crisis decision-making.
The way he interprets the endocrinology is that while both men and women experience a cortisol spike during a terrifying event, the presence of high testosterone in the male system acts as a buffer.
A chemical buffer.
Exactly. It theoretically allows the brain to bypass the paralyzing effects of fear and execute an immediate action. In contrast, he argues that the data shows female cortisol spikes higher and lingers significantly longer in the bloodstream.
Now, what is crucial to understand about his framing here is that he doesn't categorize this prolonged cortisol presence as a biological flaw.
No, not at all. He actually argues it is biologically brilliant.
Right, brilliant for the prolonged, vigilant demands of nurturing and protecting offspring over a long period of time.
However, his thesis dictates that this exact same prolonged cortisol spike is disastrous when the situation demands a rapid life or death call.
He is establishing a framework where biological optimization for one necessary human function inherently disqualifies a person from another.
To bring this abstract endocrinology into the real world, Riker uses this really visceral example of a San Francisco fire captain.
Oh, yeah, the 2019 incident.
Yeah. He details this specific event where a male captain made a 30-second decision to breach a structurally compromised, flaming apartment wall.
And that split-second calculation ultimately saved 9 lives.
Riker's commentary on this event is highly pointed. He explicitly states that the captain's action wasn't an example of societal conditioning or sexism or patriarchy.
He says it was pure endocrinology at work.
He is isolating the physiological mechanism. In his view, the biological hardware required to suppress panic, calculate structural risk, and execute a terrifying physical breach in 30 seconds is inherently and exclusively masculine.
He uses this anecdote to argue that modern society reaps the life-saving benefits of male biology in emergencies, while simultaneously condemning the everyday behaviors that stem from that exact same biological profile.
From there, the book pivots from the endocrine system directly into neurology.
Right, looking specifically at spatial reasoning.
Riker pulls up MRI data from University College London to discuss brain structure. He hones in on the parietal lobes, claiming the UCL data proves that male parietal lobes are 15% denser than female parietal lobes.
And the leap the book makes here is connecting that physical density directly to the capacity for three-dimensional spatial strategy.
Which is interesting because the parietal lobe is indeed heavily involved in processing sensory information and spatial orientation.
Yeah.
But Riker takes this neurological data and applies it to extreme occupational disparities. He asks the reader to consider why all 10,000 certified FAA air traffic controllers handling the incredibly congested airspace over New York are male.
And he claims the FAA didn't just stumble into this demographic reality. He asserts they realized it way back in 1972.
In his framework, managing thousands of metal tubes flying at hundreds of miles an hour in three-dimensional space requires an extreme outlier level of spatial reasoning.
So he asserts that this 15% denser parietal lobe provides the literal neurological hardware for the job.
And he positions this as an undeniable cold biological truth that modern progressive institutions constantly try to sweep under the rug in the name of diversity quotas.
He just continues to stack the studies to reinforce this connection between biology and high-stakes performance. He pulls in a 2014 study out of Yale that looked at Wall Street traders.
Right, the testosterone study.
Yeah. The book highlights the finding that traders with naturally higher testosterone levels not only close deals faster, but they manage risk more aggressively in volatile markets.
He then extends this exact logic to the military, specifically Marine snipers.
The text points out that the sniper community is 93% male.
Riker cites high-stress training drills where male snipers allegedly outshoot female counterparts by 37%.
Wow.
And he connects this directly back to the cortisol to testosterone ratio and the parietal lobe's spatial processing. His synthesis of all these points culminates in this really blunt declaration. He writes, "Biology isn't bigotry. It's the reason you're here."
It's a bold theoretical leap. He's looking at human hierarchy not as a social construct, but as a strict evolutionary inheritance.
And to make this point, Riker moves into what we could call primate parallel.
Right, the gorillas.
He looks at Rwandan mountain gorillas to argue that nature does not reward democratic consensus. It rewards dominant strength.
He cites data claiming that gorilla troops led by dominant silverbacks have an 80% higher survival rate against predators and rival troops.
The underlying premise here is that human leadership structures are deeply tethered to our evolutionary past. In nature, as Riker interprets it, weak or hesitant leaders just get their entire troops killed.
The stakes are absolute.
This brings him to one of the more fascinating, or maybe bizarre comparisons in the book, the chimpanzee named Frodo.
Oh, Frodo. Frodo was a legendary 300-pound chimpanzee living in Tanzania's Gombe Reserve.
The book spends a significant amount of time detailing Frodo's behavior.
Riker focuses not just on Frodo's brute physical strength, but on his calculated political alliances and specific dominance postures within the troop hierarchy.
This is where Riker attempts to bridge the gap between the raw survival of the jungle and the curated environment of the modern boardroom.
He cites a study from the Harvard Business Review that analyzed the physical behavior of Fortune 500 CEOs during high-stakes quarterly earnings calls.
And the study allegedly found that 89% of these executives unconsciously mirror Frodo's specific dominance postures.
89%. The book details these postures vividly. Things like deliberately spreading the shoulders to take up more physical space.
And tilting the chin upward to expose the neck.
Right, which is a classic primate sign of absolute confidence and fearlessness.
Riker's takeaway is that whether you are a chimp defending a water source in Tanzania or a CEO defending a profit margin on Wall Street, the biological markers of leadership are identical.
He argues that our brains possess ancient neural recognition software. When we see the spread shoulders and the tilted chin, the primitive part of our brain instantly registers leader.
It completely bypasses any modern intellectual filters we might have.
So this entire biological foundation sets the stage for his primary critique of the modern world.
Because if these traits, testosterone-driven risk assessment, dense parietal spatial reasoning, and dominant physical posturing, if these are the fundamental building blocks of functional human hierarchy, what happens when a society decides those traits are toxic?
That question drives the text directly into the second major theme of the book, the double bind of the modern workplace.
The book paints a very grim picture of this double bind. Riker asserts that our primary institutions, education, corporate human resources, healthcare, have been subjected to institutional capture.
He argues that the ideologies currently governing these spaces actively punish the very masculinity that built them.
To quantify this claim, he relies heavily on pharmaceutical statistics. He cites a specific data point claiming that between 2010 and 2023, antidepressant prescriptions rose by an astonishing 62% in female-dominated fields.
He specifically calls out education and social work.
Yeah. And he contrasts that massive spike with a much lower 18% rise in male-dominated industries like construction and heavy logistics.
The implication Riker draws from these numbers is profound. He suggests that when men are forced to operate in environments that actively suppress their natural biological inclinations toward decisiveness and hierarchy, the resulting psychological friction literally manifests as clinical depression.
To give these statistics a human face, the book details several highly specific, really illustrative anecdotes. One involves Michael Carter, a fourth-grade teacher in Portland.
According to Riker's account, Carter was prescribed the antidepressant Zoloft simply because he questioned his school's newly implemented bathroom policies regarding biological boys using girls' restrooms.
The book frames Carter's experience as a systemic penalty for wrongthink. Riker argues that in professions completely captured by progressive ideologies, passive obedience is valued above all else.
When a man exhibits what Riker considers a traditional, masculine, protective, or questioning instinct, he is no longer engaged in debate. His behavior is pathologized.
The system's response is to medicate the instinct away, rather than address the underlying concern.
Another anecdote he uses to hammer this point home is the story of Greg Thompson, a nurse in Chicago.
The text claims Thompson was officially fired for toxic positivity.
Toxic positivity, because he organized an unauthorized team lunch to boost morale during a difficult shift.
Riker uses these stories to argue that modern corporate HR departments are not designed to optimize human performance, but to enforce a sterile compliance.
He writes that modern corporations would rather medicate masculinity than manage it.
This specific type of workplace friction leads into a concept Riker borrows from Stanford psychologists. They termed it compliance burnout.
The book deeply analyzes this Stanford study, which reportedly found that men working in progressive fields experience triple the chronic workplace stress compared to men working in traditional, physically demanding, or results-oriented industries.
Triple the stress. And Riker's explanation for this isn't that the progressive jobs are physically harder.
Not at all. He argues the stress comes from the constant exhausting mental gymnastics required to suppress hardwired biological instincts just to appease human resources.
The men are constantly policing their own tone, their assertiveness, and their natural problem-solving approaches to avoid triggering an ideological tripwire.
He points to the actual training materials used by major corporations as undeniable proof of this hostile environment.
A key piece of evidence he uses is Google's internal bias training manual. Riker claims this manual explicitly lists decisiveness as a leadership risk factor.
He says it categorizes it alongside actual prejudices like racism or sexism.
From Riker's perspective, labeling decisiveness as a risk factor is a symptom of a civilization that has completely lost its grip on reality.
He argues that the ability to make a firm, immediate decision is the exact biological trait required to build and maintain any functional society.
He uses a dark historical analogy here. He points out the absurdity of trying to storm Omaha Beach with a consensus committee holding a sensitivity seminar.
This critique of how modern institutions process human behavior leads to one of the most unique theoretical models in the book, the dopamine divide.
Riker uses physical fitness and the neurochemistry of exercise as a predictor of a person's broader political and economic worldview.
The data point he uses to launch this theory comes from the Cato Institute. The book cites data claiming that men who hold active gym memberships are 23% more likely to oppose universal basic income, or UBI.
On the surface, gym attendance and economic policy seem completely unrelated, but Riker connects them through neurochemistry.
The dopamine divide theory suggests that men who lean into traditional masculine behaviors receive their neurochemical rewards, specifically dopamine, from quantifiable physical progress.
The core example he uses is weightlifting, specifically adding 5 pounds to a barbell.
It is a brutally objective environment. Gravity does not care about your feelings or your background. You either lift the weight or you don't.
And when you successfully lift it, your brain releases a surge of dopamine. It reinforces the value of hard work, objective reality, and tangible results.
Riker maps this neurochemical feedback loop directly onto political philosophy. He suggests that men who intuitively understand the unforgiving reality of gravity and the satisfaction of lifting heavy loads will naturally gravitate toward political and economic policies based on tangible results, merit, and personal accountability.
They oppose UBI because getting something for nothing violates that hardwired neurochemical reward system.
He then contrasts this barbell mentality with modern progressivism. The book argues that progressive goals, such as the abstract pursuit of equity, fail to trigger that same primal neurochemical satisfaction in the male brain.
You cannot quantify equity the way you can quantify a steel plate. You cannot put it on a bar and lift it.
Because the goalpost is constantly moving and inherently abstract, it offers no clean dopamine release.
The resulting mismatch is central to his worldview. You have a demographic of traditional men whose biology is screaming for quantifiable achievement and objective truth, trapped inside modern institutions that demand abstract, unquantifiable, and often contradictory compliance.
The friction, he argues, is tearing society apart.
And if his critique of the modern workplace is provocative, his analysis of global leadership takes the controversy to an entirely different level.
We are entering the territory of the book that Riker titles Crisis Gynecology.
And this section focuses entirely on his views regarding female leadership on the world stage. Once again, it is absolutely vital to reiterate our neutrality disclaimer here.
Yes, very important. We are unpacking the author's highly controversial biologically determinist claims regarding female leaders.
We are exploring his arguments as they are presented in the text. We are not endorsing them as historical or scientific fact.
The foundation of this section is historical analysis viewed strictly, almost obsessively, through the lens of female endocrinology. Riker begins with an event from 1787 involving Catherine the Great.
During this period, Catherine famously ordered the Russian fleet to abandon the strategically vital Black Sea. Riker performs what he calls a historical autopsy of this military decision.
To conduct this autopsy, the book bypasses traditional geopolitical analysis and digs directly into 18th century court physician logs.
Riker notes that Catherine's generals were documented, finding her pacing the war room barefoot, highly agitated, and screaming at maps.
He cross-references this behavior with medical notes indicating she had missed her scheduled bloodletting.
Bloodletting, of course, being the crude historical medical practice used to balance the body's humors.
Precisely. But Riker argues that modern retrospective medical analysis provides a different explanation. He claims that the timeline of her troop withdrawals consistently and predictably aligned with luteal phase progesterone spikes in her menstrual cycle.
To understand the leap the book makes here, we have to look at what Riker claims progesterone actually does to the brain.
He makes the case that during the luteal phase, the specific hormonal cocktail in the female body, biologically prioritizes extreme risk aversion.
He is arguing that Catherine didn't abandon the Black Sea because of a shift in military intelligence. He says it was because her neurochemistry temporarily hijacked her strategic nerve, forcing a retreat to perceived safety.
It is an incredibly localized biological argument applied to grand, sweeping geopolitics. And he doesn't leave this theory in the 18th century. He brings it forward to the Cold War era.
The book discusses Indira Gandhi during the incredibly tense 1971 Bangladesh crisis.
This part of the book relies on allegedly declassified CIA files. Riker claims these intelligence files revealed that Gandhi's own top-level military advisors recognized this biological reality and actively worked around it.
The text states that her generals deliberately scheduled critical, high-stakes military briefings around her follicular phase. They were actively avoiding periods where her hormonal state might compromise her crisis decision-making capabilities.
Riker uses these isolated historical anecdotes to build toward broader statistical claims. He cites a meta-study from Oslo University that supposedly analyzed 84 historical treaties.
The book uses this study to claim that female leaders, when at their ovulation peak, concede 23% more territory or resources than male leaders in similar negotiating positions.
The statistics he pulls to support this are relentless. He references another analysis of 200 distinct peace treaties, claiming there is a 31% spike in diplomatic and territorial concessions during the specific days of a female leader's menstruation.
The entire thrust of these data points is to build an objective-sounding case that the inescapable biological reality of the female hormonal cycle is fundamentally incompatible with the ruthless, unyielding demands of maintaining an empire against hostile adversaries.
The book takes this biological determinism a step further by introducing a concept Riker terms the maternal risk matrix.
He moves from the menstrual cycle to the profound hormonal shifts associated with motherhood, specifically lactation and oxytocin.
Oxytocin is often called the bonding hormone. It promotes profound feelings of attachment, empathy, and nurturing.
Riker argues that when a leader is lactating, the massive spikes in oxytocin literally reconfigure her brain's priority matrix. He says it causes her to subconsciously surrender imperial advantages in favor of avoiding conflict.
He uses Queen Anne as his primary historical example here. The book claims that her controversial withdrawal of British forces from Spain in 1707 was heavily influenced, or as he puts it, softened by these maternal hormonal shifts.
Compromising British geopolitical strength.
To back this up with data, Riker turns to the Cambridge Regnal records. He analyzes the territorial gains and losses of monarchs and claims these records show a glaring disparity.
According to his reading of the data, 38% of pregnant queens lost sovereign territory during their reigns,
compared to only a 12% loss rate among childless female rulers.
He even applies this matrix to Queen Victoria, who is arguably one of the most famous and successful empire builders in global history.
Despite her reputation, Riker claims that an analysis of War Office documents proves her troop deployments and aggressive military posturing noticeably dropped each time she was pregnant, and she had 9 different confinements.
The brutal conclusion Riker draws from all this historical and biological data is that societies that allow mothers to lead during wartime are essentially blinding themselves to biological reality and painting targets on their own capitals.
He views the maternal instinct as a beautiful mechanism for raising children, but a fatal flaw when tasked with commanding armies.
The most alarming part of this section is his assertion that our modern global adversaries already know this and are actively weaponizing it against the West today.
The book dives into modern realpolitik. It claims that the Chinese government in Beijing utilizes advanced artificial intelligence to actively predict the menstrual cycles of prominent Taiwanese female politicians.
The tactical application here, according to Riker, is that Beijing times its most aggressive, intimidating military drills and airspace incursions to coincide perfectly with the hormonal phases where these leaders are biologically most prone to risk aversion and psychological stress.
He presents this as a terrifying evolution of biological warfare.
And he is quick to point out that the West engages in this exact same dark calculus. The book cites 2017 Wiki Tribune leaks.
These leaks allegedly exposed that high-level NATO planners scheduled the most critical, tense periods of the Brexit negotiations, specifically around Theresa May's contraceptive-induced hormonal plateaus.
If the claims in this book are to be believed, the highest echelons of global diplomacy are already fully operating on what Riker darkly refers to as menstrual math.
This exhaustive critique of female biology naturally forces the reader to ask a question. If female biology is so inherently unsuited for the cold calculus of empire, what physical and societal structures does the author believe do sustain an empire?
That transitions the text away from the biology of the human body and into the biology of the state, which brings us to his deep dive into infrastructure, logistics, and what he calls the brutality of efficiency.
Riker views infrastructure not just as roads and bridges, but as the physical manifestation of masculine governance. He starts his historical analysis of logistics with the Mongols.
The book describes in visceral detail the Mongol Yam outposts.
This was a vast, interconnected system of relay stations spaced exactly every 40 kilometers, stretching all the way from the Danube River in Europe to the Yellow River in China.
He directly compares this 13th century system to modern logistical marvels like Jeff Bezos' Amazon supply chain. But he emphasizes that Genghis Khan's just-in-time tyranny was built on a foundation of absolute violence.
The YAM system wasn't about customer convenience. It was about the rapid, terrifying projection of imperial power across unimaginable distances.
The details Riker highlights are incredible. He points out that the Mongols stocked exactly 9 spare horses per courier at these stations, and absolutely zero luxuries.
It was pure stripped-down efficiency. Because of this ruthless optimization, Mongol couriers could cross the staggering distance from Budapest to Beijing in just 14 days.
The precision of this empire extended far beyond the horses. The book delves into the armories at Karakorum, noting that they stockpiled an astonishing 750,000 arrows.
But what Riker focuses on is the obsessive mathematical consistency of these weapons. Every single one of those 750,000 arrows was fletched with eagle feathers to ensure perfect, identical aerodynamic performance.
And the enforcement of this standard was terrifying. Riker explains that if a Mongol smith crafted an arrowhead that deviated from the standard weight by more than a single gram, that smith was executed.
There was zero tolerance for deviation, zero room for individual expression. The book uses this to fiercely critique the modern Silicon Valley ethos of move fast and break things.
Riker's counter to that modern tech philosophy is chilling. He writes, break a Mongol arrow and they'd break your spine.
He is arguing that true, lasting imperial control requires a marriage of blinding speed and absolute, unforgiving brutality. To illustrate the economic impact of this brutality, he details the methods of Mongol tax enforcers.
This part is graphic. Riker points out that these enforcers didn't carry ledgers or calculators, they carried blades.
When they encountered tax evaders, the policy wasn't to garnish wages. The policy was to skin the evader alive, fill their skin with straw, and hang the effigy in the town square as a visual warning.
While modern sensibilities recoil at this barbarism, Riker focuses purely on the economic result.
The result of this terror-based compliance network, according to the text, was near total tax compliance across a massive geographic area, leading to a tripling of the Silk Road economies.
He states flatly that fear-driven wealth and violent enforcement aren't historical aberrations. They are the exact required mechanics of how empires actually function.
This brings us to a phrase Riker uses that really anchors this entire section. Infrastructure is violence crystallized.
He applies this concept even to monumental projects that history sometimes views as failures, such as Sneferu's pyramids in Egypt.
Sneferu built several pyramids, some of which were structurally flawed or collapsed during construction. Modern historical analysis sometimes views this as a massive waste of resources or an engineering embarrassment.
Riker completely rejects that interpretation. He argues that these structures didn't crumble from shame, they were deliberate, towering trophies of excess.
The book posits that the sheer, staggering waste of human labor, stone, and wealth was calculated. It was designed to dare rival nations to even attempt to match the pharaoh's power.
It is a psychological weapon, a calculated waste of resources designed to project such overwhelming dominance that enemies surrender before a battle is even fought.
Riker traces this same aggressive masculine calculus forward into the industrial age, focusing heavily on railways.
He views railways not merely as a mode of civilian transportation, but as literal weaponry laid across the earth. A fascinating historical example he uses to prove this involves the Ottoman Empire in 1888.
The book details how Ottoman engineers intentionally laid parallel railway tracks near Baghdad using two completely different specifications, one narrow gauge and one wide gauge.
To a modern civil engineer, this looks like the height of bureaucratic inefficiency and incompetence.
But Riker explains that this was a deliberate, brilliant anti-invasion tactic. By making the railway gauges incompatible, the Ottomans ensured that if the British or any other invading army captured the railhead, they could not seamlessly use their own trains to push supplies and troops deeper into Ottoman territory.
The inefficiency was a weapon designed to befuddle and stall the enemy's logistics.
He contrasts this defensive use of incompatible rails with nations that used railways to centralize and project massive power. He points to the United States, which unified its entire continental system around the 4-foot 8.5-inch gauge, creating an unstoppable economic engine.
He also points to the unified rail network of Germany, which allowed for unprecedented military mobilization.
The counterexample he provides is the Habsburg Empire. The book notes that the Habsburgs failed to unify their infrastructure, resulting in 12 entirely incompatible railway systems crisscrossing their territory.
Riker argues that the empire ultimately fractured along those very infrastructural lines, unable to mobilize or communicate effectively. He summarizes this point by writing, "Steel doesn't compromise. Neither should men who lay the tracks."
This obsession with systems enforcing survival leads directly into what the book calls the breed or starve doctrine.
Here, Riker shifts from the logistics of steel to the logistics of human population, looking specifically at colonial Australia, particularly New South Wales.
In the early days of the colony, survival was far from guaranteed. The government needed to rapidly populate the territory to secure the empire's hold.
The policy they implemented was entirely rooted in biological mathematics. They offered substantial land grants to ex-convicts, but with a brutal catch. The grants were only awarded if the men sired 5 or more children.
It was a raw numbers game. And to address the reality that infant mortality was devastating the colony, the government didn't launch awareness campaigns. They implemented a stark biological incentive.
They cut the infant mortality rate in half, simply by providing double food rations to mothers who successfully kept 4 or more children alive.
Riker acknowledges that modern readers would view this as harsh, transactional, and perhaps dehumanizing branding of human life. However, he notes that desperation breeds innovation.
The hungry colonists bred the necessary solutions to populate the empire. The policy wasn't compassionate, but it was effective, which is his ultimate metric for governance.
Speaking of prioritizing effectiveness over morality, his analysis of how the American frontier managed vice is incredibly revealing regarding his overarching philosophy.
The book takes us to Dodge City in 1876 to examine what became known as the Saloon Settlement.
Riker argues that robust civilizations are not built by chasing utopian ideals or attempting to eradicate human nature. They are built by accepting base human instincts and channeling them into productive, or at least manageable, ends.
In Dodge City, a rough frontier town prone to extreme violence, the local sheriff made the controversial decision to officially license the brothels.
By institutionalizing this vice, Riker claims the results were immediate and staggering. The book cites statistics showing that murders in Dodge City dropped by 60% within 6 months of the licensing.
The mechanics of why this worked are fascinating. The prostitutes essentially became neutral arbiters of disputes. Because the brothels were recognized businesses, they had an interest in maintaining order.
They effectively diffused bar brawls before they escalated into gunfights.
However, Riker places a massive caveat on this success. He stresses that this managed vice only functioned because it operated within a strict masculine hierarchy, where the lawmen still possessed the overwhelming physical force and the guns to back up the system.
The vice was tolerated and managed strictly to ensure the economic and physical survival of the town, not out of any progressive sense of sex worker rights.
He provides another massive scale example of this with the British military in India in 1885.
The British command discovered a massive logistical vulnerability. 22% of their entire military budget in the region was vanishing.
It wasn't being lost to enemy action, but to the medical costs of treating soldiers afflicted with venereal diseases.
The moralizing elements of Victorian society back in England were appalled by the behavior of the troops. But the military commanders on the ground in India faced a purely logistical crisis.
Their solution was brutally pragmatic. They established highly regulated brothels in close proximity to the military barracks, instituting strict medical inspections for the women.
The result was that morality complaints from the local populace decreased, but far more importantly for the British Empire, the disease rates plummeted and combat readiness went up.
Riker uses this historical data point to prove that masculine governance will always prioritize logistical reality, fiscal efficiency, and combat readiness over virtue signaling and moral panic.
That intense prioritization of cold logic, biological reality, and strategic advantage over sentiment transitions us seamlessly into the 5th section of the book.
Riker titles this section The Alchemy of Warfare, Intelligence, and Strategy. He begins this exploration with one of the most romanticized figures in military history, T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia.
This part of the book is incredible because Riker completely strips away the cinematic romanticism of Lawrence uniting the disparate Arab tribes. He ignores the poetry of the desert and focuses purely on biology, astronomy, and math.
He introduces what he calls the Lawrence Doctrine.
The book claims that Lawrence's massive success in outsmarting the entrenched Ottoman forces wasn't just a matter of cultural fluency, it was the exploitation of a specific biological advantage.
Riker cites a highly specialized 1997 study from Heidelberg University that analyzed the optical structures of various populations. The study claims that the retinas of the Bedouin tribesmen possess 15% more rod cells than the average European or Ottoman soldier.
To break that down, rod cells in the human eye are the specific photoreceptor cells responsible for vision at low light levels. They are crucial for night vision.
So Lawrence is operating in the vast, featureless desert, and he realizes his Bedouin scouts can literally see in the dark significantly better than the enemy.
Riker details how Lawrence combined this biological advantage with a deep mathematical understanding of lunar cycles. He created what the book refers to as the luminous exposure formula.
Lawrence meticulously factored in the specific moon phase, the anticipated cloud cover, and the ambient altitude light to calculate the exact moments of maximum darkness.
By running this formula, Lawrence was able to give his Bedouin scouts a distinct 500-yard visual detection buffer over the Ottoman sentries. They could see the Ottomans long before the Ottomans could see them.
And Lawrence wasn't just doing this math on a scrap of paper. The book mentions that he utilized a highly customized, incredibly complex astrolabe, an instrument so rare and valuable that when recently sold at Christie's auction house for £2 million.
Lawrence used this astrolabe to essentially hack astronomy. He memorized the precise positions of the stars to navigate the shifting sands of the desert flawlessly in the dead of night, completely bypassing the need for mapped roads or daylight.
Riker points out the enduring legacy of this tactic, noting that modern elite marine reconnaissance units still train extensively using Lawrence's lunar navigation charts.
The reason they still use a century-old technique is brilliant. Human eyesight and starlight cannot be jammed or hacked by enemy electronic warfare the way a modern GPS signal can.
Riker frames this as an ancient, biological, and mathematical approach to warfare that remains superior to fragile modern technology.
Following this thread of mathematical superiority, Riker transitions from the sweeping deserts of the Middle East to the claustrophobic code-breaking rooms of World War II.
He focuses heavily on what he calls the Churchill cipher. History is full of stories regarding Winston Churchill's eccentricities, but Riker reframes these quirks as calculated, high-level wartime logistics.
He shares a bizarre but fascinating story regarding the Dunkirk evacuation. As the British Army was facing annihilation on the beaches, the diplomatic back channels were frantic.
According to the book, Soviet spies intercepted urgent, highly classified demands from Churchill, ordering his staff to bring him 3 additional inches of piping hot water for his bath.
The Soviet intelligence analysts were baffled. Given the catastrophic military context, they naturally assumed piping hot water was a complex code phrase for troop movements or naval deployments.
But according to Riker, who cites declassified intelligence files, the spies were only partially right. It wasn't a verbal code, it was a physical mechanism for counterintelligence.
The book claims that Churchill was demanding his bathwater be kept at a scalding 104 degrees. Why? Because he was using the intense steam rising from the bathwater to carefully loosen the wax seals and adhesive on highly classified, intercepted diplomatic pouches.
The steam allowed him to open the pouches, read the contents, and reseal them without tearing the paper or leaving any evidence of tampering.
He was literally running a one-man counterintelligence operation from a bathtub while coordinating the rescue of the British Army.
It is an incredible anecdote that perfectly serves Riker's larger point about relentless, masculine problem solving. He links this kind of physical intuition directly to Alan Turing and the legendary codebreakers at Bletchley Park.
Riker makes a deeply controversial claim here. He states that Turing possessed an unpublished testosterone theory regarding the nature of code breaking.
The book suggests Turing believed that the flashes of intuition required to suddenly spot the hidden patterns in complex ciphers stemmed directly from ancient Pleistocene hunting patterns hardwired into the male brain.
Whether that neurological theory is biologically sound or not, Riker points to the functional, undeniable result. By 1943, this team of men at Bletchley Park was successfully decrypting 3,000 highly classified German messages every single day.
And the way they broke some of these supposedly unbreakable codes highlights Riker's theory of physical reality over abstract theory.
The best example of this is the story of the treacle tart.
Riker details an incident where a British operative accidentally dropped a piece of sticky pastry, a treacle tart, onto a captured German Abwehr cipher manual.
Rather than ruining the document, the sticky sugar reacted with the paper in a revealing way.
The sugar residue highlighted the microscopic buildup of fingerprint oils left by the German radio operators.
By analyzing which specific pages and characters were wearing down the fastest from the operator's repeated touch, the British cryptanalysts gained critical insight into which cipher keys were being used most frequently, exposing massive vulnerabilities in the code structure.
Riker uses this pastry anecdote to argue a profound philosophical point. He asserts that masculine systems of governance and warfare optimize through these physical, tangible, and sometimes messy realities of the world, whereas feminine systems prioritize socialization and theoretical consensus.
To find another example of this gritty physical optimization, Riker looks backward to medieval engineering, specifically the design and defense of massive fortifications like Chateau Gaillard in 1204 and the legendary Dover Castle.
He ignores the grand architecture of the keeps and focuses entirely on the latrines, known historically as the garderobes.
Dover Castle, for instance, featured a massive 12-seat garderobe designed to service a garrison of 300 heavily armed men during a protracted siege.
But Riker points out that the math of 300 men using 12 seats only works if strict discipline is maintained. He details that the garrison adhered to a brutal, mandatory 15-second rotation for using the facilities.
A 15-second bathroom break, the alternative to this strict discipline was catastrophic. If the system backed up, the defenders would have to bring in gong farmers.
Men whose entire job was to manually haul away human waste, which would severely compromise the castle's internal logistics and hygiene during an attack.
And the physical engineering of the castle's waste management is astonishingly brilliant. Riker explains the design of these concentric castles, noting that the privy chutes and the deadly arrow slits were angled with precise aerodynamic calculation.
They were designed specifically to prevent the prevailing crosswinds from blowing the toxic stench and physical waste back up into the faces of the defending archers.
The book frames this as the ultimate unglamorous example of masculine problem solving. You are under siege by a hostile army, you are dealing with the biological reality of hundreds of men trapped in a stone box, and you engineer a physical, mathematical, and aerodynamic solution to keep the fortress running and the men fighting.
It is survival through applied physics.
This focus on survival through physics brings us to the final major section of the text, Section 6, which Riker titles The Modern Frontier.
Having established his sprawling theories on endocrinology, historical warfare, and imperial infrastructure, he brings the lens sharply back to the present day. He applies his framework to modern boardrooms, the digital empires of Silicon Valley, and the rapidly growing survivalist movement.
He begins this modern analysis with what he provocatively terms chemical warfare in finance. Moving away from the battlefield, he looks at the adrenal glands as the true arbiters of modern corporate power.
Focusing specifically on the massive consumption of caffeine in high finance.
The book offers a cautionary tale about a junior analyst at Goldman Sachs, whom Riker dubs Decaf Dave. According to the anecdote, Decaf Dave was working deep in the due diligence process during the monumental bankruptcy of Toys R Us.
During this high-stress period, he allegedly decided to prioritize his health and switched from coffee to herbal tea.
Riker claims that without the necessary chemical stimulation driving his focus, Decaf Dave missed a massive 9-figure spreadsheet error buried deep within the valuation cells.
The author's takeaway is blunt and unforgiving. Weak stimulants create weak focus, which inevitably leads to weak valuations.
To provide the counterexample, Riker contrasts Decaf Dave with the aggressive team at BlackRock that orchestrated the acquisition of Lehman Brothers assets during the 2008 financial collapse.
The book claims this team wasn't merely relying on financial acumen. They were relying on heavy pharmaceuticals. The entire team was reportedly mainlining up to 6 daily coffees just to sustain the brutal pace of the negotiations.
The result of this chemical warfare: the BlackRock team secured an astonishing $800 billion in Lehman assets for pennies on the dollar, specifically 12 cents on the dollar.
However, Riker does acknowledge the biological cost of this strategy. He cites a statistic from the Harvard Business Review indicating that highly caffeinated negotiators might possess the aggression to secure bolder offers, but the resulting cortisol spike causes them to miss 23% more red flags in the acquisition targets.
The caffeine drives them to win the immediate bloody battle across the boardroom table, even if it blinds them to long-term structural risks. It is a brutal, chemically driven approach to business that perfectly mirrors the biological imperatives Raker outlines in the first chapter.
He sees this exact same aggressive ancestral psychology operating at an even higher level in the digital realm. The book discusses the founders of Silicon Valley, referring to them not as innovators, but as digital warlords who have built modern empires.
To illustrate this, he tells the story of a massive Bitcoin mining operation based in Reykjavik, Iceland. When the Icelandic parliament attempted to debate the complex tax classification of the digital asset, the miner operating the server farm reportedly just laughed at them.
The miner's attitude, as Riker frames it, was that bureaucrats and politicians cannot outlaw gravity or mathematics. The raw, staggering computational power that the miner physically controlled simply superseded the parliament's theoretical paperwork.
Raker argues that these massive tech empires are built entirely upon the weaponization of male psychology. He breaks down the user interface of modern e-commerce.
When you are shopping online and a flashing red alert pops up saying, "Only 2 items left in stock," Riker explains that this isn't just a marketing trick.
That alert is specifically designed to trigger the exact same ancient neural pathway in the brain that used to warn a primitive tribe that a rival group was stealing their scarce water source.
It triggers a deeply embedded primal resource panic. Riker believes that the entire architecture of the modern digital economy is built on exploiting these ancient rivalry circuits and territorial instincts hidden within the human brain.
Finally, Riker turns his attention away from the digital screen and back to the physical dirt. He views the growing modern survivalist and prepper movement as the ultimate, undeniable testing ground for all his theories regarding biological governance.
He uses a 2022 mass casualty weather event on the grueling Appalachian Trail to make his final, definitive point.
The comparison he draws from this event is stark. The book claims that emergency rescue teams found specific groups of hikers who had completely collapsed from physical exhaustion and exposure.
When the teams examined their gear, they found these hikers were carrying heavy 35-pound packs filled with what Riker dismissively calls woke gear. Things like heavy, gender-neutral hygiene kits and completely unnecessary items like biodegradable glitter.
He sharply contrasts these exhausted hikers with groups of men on the same trail who were carrying stripped-down 22-pound loads.
According to the rescue reports Riker cites, those men carrying the lighter, purely functional loads navigated out of the danger zone to safety 6 hours faster than the other groups, and were found comfortably roasting squirrels over a fire while they waited out the storm.
Riker uses this visceral example to illustrate the Navy SEAL 15-pound rule. This is a special forces doctrine dictating that if a piece of gear is not absolutely demonstrably mission critical for survival or combat, it is immediately scrapped from the pack.
He contrasts that lean, ruthless, masculine efficiency with the official recommendations from FEMA.
The book points out that FEMA recommends civilians prepare 50-pound go bags for emergencies. Riker mocks this recommendation mercilessly, claiming these bags are designed by risk-averse bureaucrats as if they were packing for a kindergarten field trip.
He argues that trying to run from a wildfire or a flood with 50 pounds of unnecessary compliance gear will literally get people killed.
He supports this need for physical competence by referencing a PragerU video series titled "Why Boys Need Danger." The text argues that young boys are biologically, evolutionarily wired to seek out and require physical risk.
Without that danger, they fail to develop into men capable of handling the brutal survival scenarios the world inevitably produces.
He ends this entire section with a highly provocative, almost darkly comedic anecdote about a feminist prepper group located in the Pacific Northwest.
According to the book's account, this group publicly bragged on social media about their ethical choices, specifically highlighting that they used vegan-friendly, organic coconut oil to lubricate their AR-15 rifles.
Riker details what happened next. When this group attempted to run a defensive bear drill in the deep woods where the temperature had dropped to 40 degrees, the thermodynamics of their ethical choice caught up with them.
The organic coconut oil completely congealed in the cold, freezing the moving parts of the rifles. Every single gun jammed instantly.
The author contrasts this failure with the practices of a local Vietnam veteran who maintains his 1970 M16 rifle using a noxious, highly toxic mixture of kerosene and whale grease.
The veteran's rifle fires flawlessly in sub-zero temperatures. Riker's concluding point in this section is absolute. Ideology, whether it is veganism, feminism, or modern corporate compliance, will literally get you killed the moment it runs up against the cold, hard, unforgiving physics of survival.
So, after hundreds of pages of endocrinology, Mongol history, corporate HR critiques, and survivalist anecdotes, how does he wrap up this massive provocative thesis?
Let's synthesize Riker's epilogue, which serves as his final manifesto to his readers. He argues, in the most certain terms possible, that the war on masculinity is not a cultural myth. It is real, it is biological, and it is accelerating toward a societal collapse.
He uses the epilogue to issue a direct call to action to the men reading his book. He urges them not to surrender to the institutional capture he described.
He tells them explicitly not to apologize for their existence, not to beg for permission from HR departments to act decisively, and to completely ignore what he calls the shrieking of modern progressive critics.
His final call to arms is for men to violently reclaim their biological drive. He firmly believes that men are uniquely evolutionarily wired to conquer chaos, to protect perimeters, and to provide resources.
The book's closing argument is that the only way to save Western civilization from its current trajectory of collapse is for men to take charge again, utilizing their biological imperatives to build empires anew, starting at the micro level with their own families and local communities.
It is an incredibly heavy, dense, and unyielding book. And as we reach the end of this deep dive, we want to remind you, the listener, one final time regarding our role here. We have merely acted as your neutral guides through this highly polarizing text.
We have provided a detailed window into the exact arguments, the specific scientific studies, and the unique historical interpretations that Conrad Riker uses to target his specific manosphere audience.
We are strictly reporting on the text. We are not taking a side on whether his biological determinism is historically accurate or morally right.
But we do want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own as you digest all of this information.
It is something that builds on the source material but looks forward into the rapidly approaching future. As human civilization moves deeper into an era dominated by artificial intelligence, remote drone warfare flown from thousands of miles away, and entirely virtual digital realities, will the purely physical, muscular, and hormonal biological imperatives that Riker claims built the ancient empires simply become obsolete?
Or, conversely, will our physical bodies, what the author refers to as our Pleistocene relics, ultimately assert themselves and dictate the future of our digital world just as ruthlessly as they dictated the battlefields of the past?
Can we ever truly escape the biology that built us?
It is a massive, fascinating question to ponder.
Thank you so much for taking this incredible deep dive with us today. If you enjoyed the depth of this analysis, please remember to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these deep explorations.
And if you are intrigued and want to read the source material for yourself to make up your own mind about his arguments, head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books to buy Empires Don't Build Themselves.
You should also follow the author, @Conrad Stryker, at Substack for more of his work. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and thanks for being here with us.